They lowered my husband's coffin into the ground while I tried to hold myself together. The rain had stopped just before the burial, leaving everything wet and gray and heavy, with the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing down on your chest. I stood there surrounded by people, our children, our friends, neighbors, colleagues, all of them crying, all of them saying how much they'd miss Thomas, how good he was, how lucky I was to have had 35 years with such a wonderful man. And I believed them. I believed every word, until his best friend Michael leaned close to me, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered, "He wasn't the man you thought he was." Those words, those 7 words, they changed everything. I felt something colder than grief crawl up my spine, spreading through my body like ice water. And I realized, standing there watching them lower my husband into the earth, that maybe I'd never really known the man I loved for 35 years. My name is Elaine Catherine Harris. I'm 62 years old. I was married to Thomas Richard Harris for 35 years, 3 months, and 12 days. We met when I was 27 and he was 29, both working at the same insurance company. He was quiet, disciplined, methodical in everything he did. I was more spontaneous, more emotional. People said we balanced each other out. We dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony with just close family, bought a modest house in the suburbs, and built what I thought was a good life. Not perfect, no marriages, but solid, reliable. Thomas was the kind of man who paid bills on time, mowed the lawn every Saturday, remembered our anniversary. He worked hard, provided for our family, and never gave me reason to doubt him. We had 2 children, David, now 33, and Rachel, 30. Thomas was a devoted father in his own quiet way. He didn't play catch or tell jokes or do any of the big demonstrative things that TV dads do. But he showed up to every school play, helped with homework, taught both kids to drive with infinite patience. When they grew up and moved away, it was just Thomas and me again. And I thought that was fine. We'd grown comfortable together, settled into routines that felt safe and familiar. He had his work trips, he was in sales, traveled sometimes for client meetings. I had my book club and volunteer work at the library. We coexisted peacefully. I thought that was enough. 3 weeks ago, Thomas died. He was on a business trip to Portland when he had a massive heart attack in his hotel room. The doctor said he died instantly, probably didn't feel any pain. That was supposed to be a comfort, I guess. But how do you find comfort in the fact that your husband died alone in a hotel room 300 miles away from you? How do you find comfort in the fact that you didn't get to say goodbye, didn't get to hold his hand one last time, didn't get to tell him all the things you'd assumed you'd have time to say later? You don't. You just try to survive the grief 1 minute at a time. The funeral was on a gray Tuesday. Over 200 people came, more than I expected. Colleagues from his company, old friends from college we rarely saw anymore, neighbors, members of our church. Person after person came up to me offering condolences, sharing memories of Thomas. He was such a good man. You were so lucky to have him. What an incredible loss. I nodded and thanked them and tried to hold back the tears that kept threatening to spill over. My children stood on either side of me, holding me up, and I was grateful for them. Grateful to not be alone in this horrible moment? Michael spoke at the service. He and Thomas had been friends since college, 40 years of friendship, more history between them than Thomas and I had. He told funny stories about their younger days, about Thomas's terrible sense of direction, about the time they tried to build a treehouse and almost fell off the roof. People laughed. It was nice. A brief moment of lightness in all that darkness. But when Michael stepped down from the podium, when he walked past me and leaned down to give his condolences, his face changed. The smile disappeared, and that's when he said it. "I'm so sorry, Elaine, he wasn't the man you thought he was." And then he walked away, leaving me standing there stunned and confused and suddenly terrified. At the burial, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. What did they mean? What wasn't I supposed to know? Had Thomas done something terrible? Been someone terrible? I watched them lower the casket and felt like I was watching a stranger being buried. Who was in that box? The man I'd made breakfast for every morning? The man I'd slept beside for 35 years? Or someone else entirely? Someone I'd never known at all? The rain started again as people dispersed. I stood there long after everyone else had left, staring at the fresh grave, and I couldn't cry anymore. I just felt numb and lost and betrayed by words I didn't even fully understand yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in our bed, my bed now, I guess, and replayed our entire marriage in my mind. Was there something I'd missed? Some sign I'd been too blind to see? Thomas had always been private, kept things to himself. But I'd thought that was just his personality. Introverted, reserved, not secretive. There's a difference, right? Or is there? I thought about the phone calls he sometimes took in another room, the business trips that seemed to happen more frequently in recent years, the locked drawer in his desk that he said contained client files too confidential to share. Were those red flags I'd ignored? Or was I just being paranoid, letting Michael's cryptic comment poison my memories? The next morning, I called Michael. He didn't answer. I called again and again. On the fourth call, he picked up. Elaine, I was going to call you. Do you mean yesterday at the funeral what you said about Thomas? Silence, long enough that I thought he'd hung up. Then maybe we should talk in person. No, tell me now whatever it is I need to know now. He sighed, heavy and sad. It's not my place to say, Elaine. Thomas should have told you himself. But he didn't. He's dead, Michael, and you said something you can't just take back. So tell me, what don't I know about my husband? Another pause. Then, quietly, Thomas had secrets. The kind that would have destroyed you if you'd known while he was alive. I tried to convince him to tell you. For years I tried, but he said some truths were too heavy to share. What truths, Michael, please? I can't, I'm sorry, but there's a place you should go. Thomas kept things there, documents, letters. He told me once that if anything ever happened to him, you'd find everything you needed to know. Check his desk, look for something addressed to E, and then he hung up, just like that. Leaving me with more questions than answers and a growing sense of dread? I went to Thomas's study, a room I rarely entered because it was his space, his sanctuary. The desk was old mahogany, heavy and imposing. I started going through the drawers systematically. Bills, client files, old business cards, nothing unusual. Then I found it tucked in the very back of the bottom drawer, a manila envelope with a single letter, E, written on the front in Thomas's handwriting. Inside was a key on a simple keychain and a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it with shaking hands. Elaine, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry for the lies, I'm sorry for the secrets. You'll find everything at the lake house. The address is below. Please try to understand. I loved you. I always loved you. Thomas? Lake house. What lake house? We didn't own a lake house. We talked about buying one someday, a retirement dream, but we'd never actually done it. Or had we? Thomas bought property without telling me? My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read the address scrawled at the bottom of the page. Pine Lake Road, about 2 hours north. I'd never been there. Never even heard Thomas mention it. I should have called my children, should have asked someone to come with me, but I didn't. This felt like something I needed to face alone. The drive felt endless. Every mile brought more questions, more fear, more anger. What had Thomas done? Was there another woman? Another family? Had my entire marriage been a lie? I played out scenarios in my head, each worse than the last. By the time I pulled up to the address, a small cabin tucked back in the woods, barely visible from the road, I was nauseous with dread. The key fit the lock, the door swung open, and I stepped into my husband's secret life. The cabin was small but well maintained. One main room with a kitchenette, a bedroom, a bathroom. Everything clean and orderly, the way Thomas liked things. But what stopped me in my tracks were the photographs on the walls. Not of me, not of our children, but of a woman I'd never seen before, dark hair, kind eyes, gentle smile, and a boy. A young boy with Thomas's eyes, Thomas's smile, Thomas's exact way of tilting his head when he laughed. Photo after photo of this boy at different ages. As a toddler, in school uniforms, playing baseball, graduating high school. And in many of the photos, Thomas was there, arms around the boy, smiling. Looking happier than I'd seen him look in years. I sat down hard on the couch, my legs giving out. Thomas had a son. A son he'd never told me about, a whole child I didn't know existed. How? When? Why? I felt like I was going to be sick. The betrayal was so complete, so total that I couldn't process it. I'd given this man 35 years of my life. I'd borne his children, kept his home, supported his career, loved him with everything I had. And he'd been living an entire separate life I knew nothing about. I wanted to scream, to break something, to hurt the way I was hurting. But I just sat there, staring at these photos of strangers who were somehow my husband's family. After a long time, I don't know how long, I stood up and started searching. In the bedroom closet, I found boxes, files, documents, a whole paper trail of Thomas's secret life. Bank statements showing regular payments to someone named Anna Reeves. Tuition receipts for a private school, medical bills, birthday cards signed to Dad. And letters, so many letters. I sat on the floor and started reading, my hands shaking, tears streaming down my face. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to understand. The first letter was dated 27 years ago. Anna, I know you're scared. I know you don't know how you're going to do this alone. But you won't be alone. I promise you that. I'll help, however I can, whatever you need. This doesn't have to destroy your life. Anna, the woman in the photos, who was she? I kept reading. More letters spanning years, references to doctor appointments, preschool applications, birthday parties, and then a letter from Anna to Thomas dated 15 years ago. Tom, I don't know how to thank you. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, a year if I'm lucky. And all I can think about is Mark. What happens to him when I'm gone? His father abandoned us. My family disowned me when I got pregnant. You're the only person who's ever helped us without judgment, without asking for anything in return. Would you? Could you? I hate to even ask, but would you consider being his guardian, making sure he's okay? I know it's too much to ask. I know you have your own family. But you're the only person I trust? Guardian. Thomas had become the guardian of this woman's child. But why? How did he even know her? I found the answer in an older letter, one of the first in the box. Anna, I'm so sorry about what happened at the office. Jenkins had no right to fire you just because you're pregnant. It's discrimination, plain and simple. I've tried talking to HR, but they're protecting him. I know you need the income. Please let me help. Consider it a loan if that makes it easier. You can pay me back when you're on your feet. A loan, that's how it started. Thomas had worked with Anna. She'd been fired for being pregnant. He'd helped her financially, just a kindness, just doing the right thing. But it hadn't stayed simple. More letters showed the progression. Anna's struggles as a single mother, her illness, cancer, stage 4, caught too late, her desperation to protect her son. And Thomas quietly, secretly stepping in, paying medical bills, covering rent, eventually taking on financial responsibility for Mark completely. And when Anna died, I found her death certificate in the box. Dated 14 years ago, Thomas had indeed become Mark's legal guardian. But not openly. Not in a way that would have involved me or our children. He'd set up this cabin, created a trust fund, arranged for Mark to attend boarding school and eventually college, all while maintaining his other life with me. Two families, two lives, complete separation. I found one more letter, the last one Thomas wrote. It was addressed to me but never sent, dated just 3 months ago. Elaine, I've tried to write this letter 1,000 times over the years. I've tried to find the words to explain what I've done and why. But every time I lose my courage. How do I tell you that I've been lying to you for almost 3 decades? How do I tell you about Mark? You'll think I had an affair. You'll think he's my biological son, but he's not. I swear on everything, Elaine, he's not. Anna was a colleague, nothing more. Good woman who got a raw deal from life. When she got sick, when she was dying, she begged me to take care of her boy. And I couldn't say no, I just couldn't, but I also couldn't tell you, because how could I ask you to accept another woman's child into our lives? How could I ask you to share our resources, our future, with a stranger's son? You would have said yes, I know you, you're too good not to, but you would have resented it, resented me. Maybe even resented Mark, and he didn't deserve that. So I kept it separate. I built this double life, managing it all alone, telling myself it was for everyone's good, but it was really cowardice. I was too afraid to trust you with the truth. Too afraid you'd leave me if you knew. I'm sorry, Elaine. I'm so, so sorry. If you're reading this after I'm gone, please know that I loved you. Every day of our marriage, I loved you. Mark wasn't a betrayal of that love. He was just an additional responsibility I took on because someone needed help and I had the means to provide it. I hope someday you can understand. And I hope you can forgive me. Thomas? I sat on the floor of that cabin surrounded by letters and photos and the remnants of my husband's secret life, and I didn't know what to feel. Betrayed? Yes. Lied to? Absolutely. But also confused because this wasn't the betrayal I'd feared. This wasn't infidelity. This wasn't a secret love affair. This was something more complicated. Thomas had made a promise to a dying woman. He'd taken on responsibility for a child who had no one else. And he'd done it quietly, privately, without asking for recognition or praise. That was noble in a way, wasn't it? But he'd also lied to me for 27 years. Built an entire life I knew nothing about. Spent money, our money, on someone else's child. Made decisions that affected our family without including me. That was betrayal. Wasn't it? I drove back home in a daze. For days I couldn't function. I called in sick to my volunteer work. I ignored calls from friends. I just sat in Thomas's study, rereading those letters, trying to make sense of it all. My children noticed something was wrong. Rachel came over concerned. Mom, are you okay? You're scaring me. I wanted to tell her, wanted to say, your father had a secret son he supported for 27 years without telling anyone. But I couldn't, not yet. I needed to understand it myself first. I'm fine, honey, just grief, it comes in waves. She hugged me and left, but she didn't believe me, I could tell. A week after finding the cabin, I called Michael again. I went to the lake house. I thought you might. Why didn't you tell me you knew all these years? He sighed. Because Thomas asked me not to, and because I thought maybe it was his story to tell, not mine. Tell me about Mark, about Anna, tell me everything. And he did. He told me how Thomas had agonized over the decision to help Anna, how he'd spent months trying to figure out the right thing to do, how he'd wanted to tell me but couldn't find the words, how the lie had grown bigger and bigger until it felt too late to confess. He wasn't unfaithful, Elaine, he was just human. He loved too much and couldn't explain it, and I think maybe he was afraid you'd see helping Mark as a betrayal when he saw it as an obligation. He got trapped in his own goodness. I needed to meet Mark. I found his contact information in Thomas's files. He was 19 now, a sophomore at a state university studying engineering. I called him. Hello? His voice was so much like Thomas's that I almost hung up. Mark, my name is Elaine Harris. I'm Thomas Harris's wife. Silence. Then quietly, Mrs. Harris, I was wondering if you'd call. You knew about me? Of course I knew about you. Dad talked about you all the time, about you and David and Rachel. I always felt like I knew you, even though we'd never met. That statement hit me hard. This boy had known about us while we'd known nothing about him. Can we meet? I'd like to talk to you. I'd like that too. We met at a coffee shop near his campus. When I walked in and saw him sitting there, my breath caught. He looked so much like Thomas. Same dark hair, same serious expression, same way of holding himself. But he had his mother's eyes, kind and gentle. He stood when he saw me, awkward and unsure. Mrs. Harris. Elaine, please call me Elaine. We sat down. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I'm sorry for your loss. He was everything to me. Tears sprang to my eyes. Tell me about him. Tell me about the Thomas you knew. And he did. He told me about how Thomas had shown up every month when Mark was little, bringing groceries and toys, and just spending time with him and his mom. About how after Anna died, Thomas had made sure Mark never felt abandoned, never felt like he was completely alone even though he lived at boarding school. About birthday cards that arrived every year without fail, about check-in phone calls, about college visits where Thomas helped him choose a major and fill out financial aid forms. He never acted like I was a burden, Mark said, his voice breaking. He never made me feel like I was taking anything away from his real family. He just showed up every time I needed him. You were his real family, I said quietly. Maybe not in the way he told people, but you were real to him. That's clear. Mark looked at me with those kind eyes. He talked about you a lot, about how you were the best thing that ever happened to him, about how you made him want to be a better person. He said you were too good for him, that you deserved honesty, but he couldn't figure out how to give it to you without losing everything. He did lose everything, I said. He's dead, and I'm sitting here with a stepson I didn't know existed. I'm not your stepson, Mark said gently. I'm not anything to you, legally or biologically. Dad never adopted me officially. He just took care of me. You don't owe me anything? But that's where he was wrong. I did owe him something. Not because Thomas had asked me to, not out of obligation, but because this young man was part of my husband's legacy. A part I'd never known about, but that was no less real than David or Rachel. Tell me about your mom, I said, and he did. He told me about Anna, her kindness, her strength, her fight against cancer, about how scared she'd been of leaving Mark alone, about how Thomas had promised her he'd take care of everything, and how he'd kept that promise even after she was gone. I started seeing Mark regularly after that. Once a month, we'd meet for lunch or coffee. I learned about his studies, his girlfriend, his plans for the future. And slowly, I started understanding Thomas's secret in a different way. Yes, he'd lied. Yes, he'd kept an entire part of his life hidden from me. But he'd also done something profoundly compassionate. He'd rescued a child who had no one. He'd kept a promise to a dying woman. He'd sacrificed his own comfort and ease because maintaining that secret life must have been exhausting to make sure someone vulnerable was protected. That wasn't villainy. That was complicated, messy, imperfect heroism. I told David and Rachel eventually. They were shocked, hurt, angry, all the things I'd been. But they also met Mark and came to understand, as I had, that he wasn't the enemy. He wasn't a threat to their father's love for them. He was just another person Thomas had cared for in a different way for different reasons. Rachel actually became quite close with him, treated him like the little brother she'd never had. David took longer to come around, but eventually he did. Dad was more complicated than we gave him credit for, he said to me one day. Yeah, I agreed. He was. 5 years have passed now. Mark graduated from college. I attended his graduation, sitting beside David and Rachel, and we all cried thinking about how proud Thomas would have been. Mark got a job as an engineer, started his career, got engaged to that girlfriend he'd mentioned. He asked if I'd come to the wedding. I'd be honored, I told him. Last year, Mark asked if he could start calling me Elaine Mom. Not Mom, that was reserved for Anna as it should be, but Elaine Mom. A recognition of the role I'd taken on, the family I'd chosen to build with him. I cried when he asked. I'd like that very much. I still have complicated feelings about what Thomas did. I'm still angry sometimes that he didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. I'm still hurt that he thought I wouldn't understand, wouldn't support him, wouldn't love him anyway. But I also understand now that people are capable of holding contradictions, of being both truthful and deceptive, both loving and scared, both brave and cowardly. Thomas was all of those things. He loved me. I know that now deeply and completely. But he also loved Mark and Anna. And he couldn't figure out how to hold all of that love in one honest life. So he split it into two lives, keeping them separate, manageable, controlled. It wasn't right. But I understand why he did it. At Thomas's gravestone now, 5 years after that funeral where Michael whispered those fateful words, there's a second name engraved below the dates of Thomas's life, beloved guardian of Mark Reeves. I added it last year with Mark's permission, because that was part of who Thomas was too, not the secret I discovered, not the betrayal I had to forgive, but a truth that deserved recognition. The man I thought I knew wasn't exactly who Thomas was. But he wasn't a stranger either. He was somewhere in between, more complicated, more flawed, more human than the neat story I'd told myself about our marriage. The man I thought I lost had left me more than memories. He'd left me purpose. He'd left me Mark, this wonderful young man who'd expanded my understanding of family, of love, of what it means to show up for people even when it's hard. Love doesn't always look like what we expect. Sometimes it hides in mistakes, waiting to be forgiven. Sometimes it lives in secrets, waiting